Are we about to see some of the best players in the world bail on the Four Nations face-off? The tournament starts 2 weeks from tomorrow, and some players are pulling out because they'd rather rest and heal for a playoff run. Here's insider Pierre LeBrun. Pierre, right after Alex Pietrangelo announced he was pulling out of the tournament to heal some nagging injuries, he stepped on the ice and played 24 minutes in a game over the weekend. Is the NHL worried about where this could be headed?
Well, first, let's just point out, I think it's absolutely genuine that Pietrangelo has not been 100% and he's managing it. And Vegas is trying to win a Stanley Cup. So, but nevertheless, I understand the look that it gave everyone. So I did reach out to NHL Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly to get his reaction to, or his concern, if there's any, about the optics for the Four Nations if players like Pietrangelo start pulling out, if there's more after him. And his response was that no. To read him exactly, Bill Daly said, quote, "I don't think this is anything like All-Star. A player has to do what's best for him, and I have no problem with a decision that takes into account being healthy for his NHL club down the stretch run." And that's exactly it. Alex Pietrangelo has played for Canada at the Olympics. You may remember in 2014. I don't think he needs necessarily to prove himself. The Four Nations is not the Olympics. If this were the Olympics in a year in Italy, I don't think Alex Pietrangelo, if he was on the team, would be pulling out. But there's that line for certain players, and I don't think Pietrangelo will be the last player to bail, but I don't think it's going to be a mass exodus, Gino. The number of high-profile players that have been named to their respective Four Nation rosters, their excitement is through the roof. Victor Hedman recently, I was in a media scrum where he talked about his excitement. You've heard Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid talk about it. So, the main guys are still going to be there, but I do think there'll be the odd player saying, hey, I'm not 100% and I got to put my Stanley Cup contending team ahead of my international needs here.
Now, two key questions come up. As you've already pointed out, the first question is, now the door's open, will other guys like Austin Matthews, also fighting injuries, pull out of the Four Nations? And Pierre, maybe even more significantly, immediate concern right now, who's Canada going to call up to replace Pietrangelo on its blue line?
Yeah, he was going to play a pretty significant role, as you know, Gino. And I think it's going to depend on what kind of role they want his replacement to play, because there are different types of defensemen obviously available. Number one, Team Canada has told me they're going to take their time. There's no point naming a replacement this week when they have until February 11th, right on the eve of the event. So they're going to take all the time they have. What they won't say, and they certainly won't get into names with me, as per always, but what they won't say is what we believe to be the case, is that they want to give Drew Doughty all the time he can to prove that he's back up to speed. We know that Doughty's on the mend. He's going to play his first game of the season here within the next 7 to 10 days, perhaps before that. Can he show the Team Canada that he's back, that he's ready to play those minutes? And it's interesting, Drew Doughty did his first media availability since his injury, his preseason injury. He did a media availability over the weekend with LA Media. And it was a good question. He was asked by one of the reporters, well, it'll be nice to have that break at Four Nations after you come back because it might give your body a bit of a rest. And he basically said, no, I want to play in Four Nations. I'm still holding out hope that Team Canada phones me. So speaking of players who want to play for their country big time, Drew Doughty's one of them. And I think he's got a real shot if he can show management, Team Canada management, that he's up to game speed. I don't think there's a guarantee of that. So because of that, there are other names that Team Canada is monitoring. And again, depending on the role. So Evan Bouchard, I think, was the biggest omission on December 4th. Obviously, he's a name worth monitoring. Noah Dobson, Dougie Hamilton. I really like Mackenzie Weegar's all-around game. But what if Team Canada decides we need more of a shutdown guy? Because we know Alex Pietrangelo was going to play those types of hard minutes. Chris Tanev of the Toronto Maple Leafs makes a lot of sense. I know Mike Johnson, MJ, mentioned that possibility on Monday night. So I agree. I think Chris Tanev is also on Team Canada's radar. So let's see where this goes, but certainly some names to monitor there.
So curious. In the past, fans would love to see their guy get the nod to play for their country, but not at the expense of hurting their chance in the playoffs. Look, we know the Four Nations is going to just be a one-off this year. In the future, the NHL wants to alternate between the Olympics and a World Cup, both played in season every second year. But is there a breakdown of the talks of the IIHF right now, Pierre?
There sure is. Darren Dreger reporting on Monday night that the NHL and HLPA have informed the IIHF that they're moving on without them for the 2028 World Cup of Hockey. That's pretty big news because there are a number of ramifications in that. One is that if the IIHF is not sanctioning a World Cup, which, by the way, that's the NHL's prerogative. The World Cup of Hockey is an NHL, NHLPA event. They would prefer to have the IHF involved, but they don't have to be involved. But if you don't have the IIHF involved, the question to me that's unanswered right now is, what happens to teams like Switzerland and Czechia if they're in this World Cup? Because the NHL wants to bring back a full-fledged World Cup, right? A lot of their players, play overseas. They don't play in the NHL. So how do some of those countries, ice a full roster if it's not a IIHF sanctioned event? That's a question I will have for the league and the Players Association when we all meet up at Four Nations next month. But it's interesting to monitor where this goes. The reason the IIHF is not thrilled with the 2028 World Cup, we're told, is because it's going to be held in February. The IIHF doesn't want to have their seasons all interrupted. So again, we'll see where this goes. I will say this: that's the case right now, and this news will be pretty big news. I think that there's still time for the NHL and HLPA to bring the IIHF back in the fold for sure.
Talks are still ongoing. Just some of the early stories Pierre's working on for the full version of Insider Trading that's coming up with Pierre, CJ, and Dregs on the early edition of SportsCenter.